My father was in the Air Force in the First World War. Most sons want to follow in their father's footsteps. I joined the Air Force because my father was an Army sergeant.
My grandfather joined the Royal Canadian Air Force as a pilot in the Second World War.
My dad was a bomber pilot. He flew Wellingtons.
I had many role models that were from the greatest generation, of course.
My dad was a pilot, so I was around planes my whole life.
I thought everyone loved their job, like my father. On Sundays after church, my dad would take us to the hangars, and we'd walk around fighter airplanes.
My uncle was a fighter pilot. For me, it just slowly morphed into following in his footsteps.
My son's in the military today, and he's getting ready to go to Latvia. Can't be more proud.
We fly so superbly in support of our country. I'm hugely proud of that.
Canadians made a major contribution to the First World War.
Upwards of 12,000 flew with the British Royal Flying Corps, the British Navy's Royal Naval Air Service, and ultimately the two services combined into the Royal Air Force.
So this is after 4 years of very intense fighting. It represented a lot of change in societies around the world, particularly in the West, who were directly involved in the conflict. The First World War really cements airplanes as a viable technology. That said, there's a lot of hesitation in Canada around what airplanes could be used for outside of the military. At the same time, you have all of these incredibly trained aviators with overseas experience, ton of flying time. So there's an appetite on the part of these people to see aviation take root in Canada.
What we need to remember is they'd come back from a war. They believed in aviation, and they believed in this country, and they made it so.
Those returning veterans wanted to form an Air Force. It was formed in 1920. It was part of the Air Board, but really it focused more on domestic applications of air power and air-mindedness in Canada. Forestry patrols, maritime reconnaissance. They worked very closely with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, looking for smugglers. They also started exploring Canada's north, building that air infrastructure, very rudimentary at this stage, but it was definitely a start.
The aircraft that proved the most valuable were the seaplanes, the float planes, because there were no runways anywhere in Canada. So far-sighted individuals used these aircraft to open up the country. That was the beginning of aviation in Canada in so many ways. And that's truly where the name bush pilot came from, because they were flying over unmapped territory.
And they would have a camera mounted to the flying boats. They would go out mapping these remote areas. So this starts this long tradition of aerial mapping within the RCAF.
The creation of the RCF is really a fascinating story from the viewpoint of nationalism. There was a sense that to survive post-war cuts, the government might just scrap this brand new Canadian Air Force. They had to be professional. And there was no better model at that time than the Royal Air Force. They wanted the Royal in there because it would be a lot harder for a cash-conscious government to scrap the Royal Canadian Air Force as opposed to the Canadian Air Force. So the Royal Canadian Air Force, when it was formed on April 1st, 1924, really what you see is an effort of survival, surviving political cuts, surviving doubts about Canada having its own Air Force.
Lieutenant Colonel Billy Barker, our most decorated warrior. He becomes the first CO of Royal Canadian Air Force Station Camp Borden. Some of the pilots who graduated from the first course in 1924 ended up in senior leadership roles in the Second World War. So Borden's contribution here is more than just the number of pilots, but when the pilots were created and how did their careers unfold at a later date.
In the 1930s, very few people were taking the threat of the Nazi regime in Germany seriously. Hitler started putting his plan in motion. The Canadian government started realizing that we might need to start rearming to match this threat.
There was an understanding that air power was going to play a much different role in this upcoming war. So the idea of training aircrew in a space that was wide open and safe was very appealing.
And this is where, in 1939, in the fall, quite early in the war, they came up with this plan to train Commonwealth aviators from South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and of course the UK and Canada. This resulted in the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan being organized, where we wound up training 131,000 aircrew from around the Commonwealth, and 72,000 of those were Canadian.
When you look geographically, Canada, it's wide open, flat. For a place to learn to fly, it's wonderful. And nobody's shooting at you.
But today the whole world is watching the most significant and exciting development in Canada's war preparations, the swift growth of the Royal Canadian Air Force.
The business of building the airfields, building the infrastructure, employed over 100,000 people. You got to imagine what that must have done for our economy.
Picture a small prairie farming community, right? Within a year and a half, there's an air base there.
Every day there'd be Harvards flying over the farm. Some of them doing aerobatics, some of them flying by. I became mesmerized with them, and I'd stop the horses. I'd sit there for perhaps 15 or 20 minutes, and that's when I wanted to be a flyer.
One of the founders of this museum was a flight instructor at this very base in this hangar. We're in Hangar 1 of a service flying training school.
There were several hundred schools all over Canada at well over 200 different locations.
Aircraft maintainers, navigators, pilots, all of those aircrew related jobs stemmed out of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan.
I wasn't interested in flying at all until the war came, and once a day we'd hear something on the radio about the Battle of France or Battle of Britain, and my buddies and I, we decided we would like to be in the Air Force.
When I joined up, the first posting I had was at the exhibition grounds in Toronto. My bunk and everything was in the sheet pit. I don't know how many, couple thousand other guys, their bunks all over the place.
I remember the first night you'd hear someone say, "Anybody here from the West?" Then it would start, because they were there from all over the place. There were some from New Zealand, Australia, one from Rhodesia, and several from Saskatchewan. I soon found out I didn't know very much about the big wide world.
The instructors we had were all gentlemen, teaching us the nasty business of war.
I went to Dauphin, Manitoba, and that's where I learned how to shoot a machine gun out of a turret on the upper part of the fuselage of a bomber.
Most of them wanted to be pilots. Of course, your chance of getting through to be a pilot depended on your skills and the need at the time.
It was a challenge to us. It was a desire to learn to fly. You know, I was anxious to do it properly. I could look down and see we were passing things underneath. I was amazed, and I thought it was wonderful. I trained at a place called St. Eugene, right near the Quebec border. It was the second phase, Harvard's.
If you were a fighter pilot, you went to a school where the Harvard would be. If you can fly a Harvard, you can fly anything.
My training in Prince Edward Island was the winter of '43. It was our first flying experience. The weather was so bloody awful. The training was quite intense, and it was heartbreaking for some guys who failed.
It resulted in huge dispersal of the young people, and not just men. The Women's Division of the Royal Canadian Air Force was the first large-scale recruitment of women into the military, many of them who did most of the staffing at these airfields.
While the men were learning how to bomb, the women were doing all the work that the men would be required to do. And I was in photography, and we took pictures of all the activity that the boys did. Most of the boys were pretty nice. They were like your brothers from home that took up drinking and smoking. They were going through for pilots. They were learning to operate the bombers. You'd see them flying.
They're going through an extremely rapid training program. Student pilots crash, and terrible things happen.
We weren't allowed to do the crashes or funerals because it wasn't allowed for women.
This is Sergeant George Humphreys Fawcett from Sackville, New Brunswick. He was just one of several relatives of mine, and his story is important to me because he was killed in an accident on a routine training mission where shortly after takeoff his engine began sputtering and the aircraft crashed into a lake. He was killed instantly.
There's a small cemetery in Saskatchewan that kind of tugs at my heart, where there's 12 graves there, 12 young Brit fellas that came to Saskatchewan to learn to fly and didn't survive.
There are at least 3,000 headstones like that across Canada for people who died just trying to learn to fly.
After I got my wings, they sent me by train down to Halifax. A lot of us were down there waiting to be sent over by convoy.
When we got to Halifax, a big ship, they directed us to the top deck. There was canvas shelters, and that's what we slept in for I think 9 days. It took us 11 days to cross the Atlantic. And all night long there'd be depth charges. And when we wake up in the morning, the configuration of ships around us had changed. Had they been sunk? What had happened?
Nazi Germany was very focused on the disruption of the supply line because your war effort is really only as good as your supply lines. You've got this urgent need for supplies and personnel in Europe. You've got this very slow, very dangerous means of getting these things there, and you have this extreme threat with the U-boats.
The submarine could submerge and come up in the middle of a convoy in among the ships, letting loose with torpedoes.
The alarm went off this night. I headed up on deck, and I could see there were 4 ships, 3 on fire and 1 blew up.
We got into Liverpool. There were masts of ships sticking out of the water, ships that had been sunk.
The Nazis had overrun continental Europe. Admiral Donitz, the head of the German submarine force, said, "I need 300 submarines and I can bring Britain to its knees." The RCAF played a major role in the Battle of the Atlantic, escorting those convoys and driving the U-boats back. The prime tactic was to fly down the sides of the convoy, and then also there would be patrol out in front of the convoy.
We are armed with machine guns and depth charges.
An aircraft attacked visually, either on a surface submarine or one that was just diving. A well-delivered depth charge attack was fatal to the submarine.
The submarines were all equipped with machine guns and light cannons, so they were able to look after themselves. One of the advantages of the flying boats was that they had huge wings. Those were utilized for fuel capacity, staying up for many hours. The crew had to be dressed warmly because they weren't the warmest aircraft to be flying in. If the weather was bad, it made it more uncomfortable and dangerous
Not a lot of Canadians today are aware that there were German U-boats in the St. Lawrence, that's how close they came to the country.
And they attacked convoys that were forming up and coming out of Montreal. The submarines fired torpedoes at 28 ships. They sank 24. So the convoys in the St. Lawrence had to be escorted.
There's a few things that turn the tide of the Battle of the North Atlantic. The advent of longer-range aircraft, but also the establishment of bases in Iceland and Greenland to cover the middle of the North Atlantic in this really dangerous gap where the wolf packs of U-boats would pick off the merchant vessels.
In the latter part of the Second World War, there were convoys that sailed with absolutely no losses at all.
When we arrived in Halifax as a group, there was 25 WDs, and the ship was massive. There was 2,000 Army on that ship, and about 60 RCAF pilots, and 25 WDs. And needless to say, we thought, oh, wow, all these lovely men. But they kept us segregated. It was 12 days at sea. They said, we'll send you to headquarters in London. We were there long after the Blitz. London was so badly hit.
The Battle of Britain was David versus Goliath. So after the fall of France in May 1940, Hitler started looking to the United Kingdom. It was handed over to Göring and his Luftwaffe to wipe out the RAF. Once that was achieved, it would pave the way for the fall of England. The British were heavily outnumbered.
There's a ton of weight on fighter command, trying to meet the German onslaught and prevent them from reaching all of their targets. This is around the time where the first Canadian fighter squadrons arrive overseas for service. 117 Canadian airmen fought in the Battle of Britain alongside the British fighter command. For the airmen in the RCAF, this is really their first taste of aerial combat overseas. Baptism by fire.
I got to the UK after the Battle of Britain. The basic training was done in Canada, the Spitfire training was done in England. I'm just a farm boy that was taught to fly. My job was to fire bullets at targets.
It was a terrific thrill to fly a Spitfire.
I was trained on the Mustang. They were made for 6'6" American boys. I couldn't reach the foot pedals, so I wound up wearing 2 cushions behind me so I could fly the airplane.
When you got to combat, we were never really told anything about it. You had to go out and find out.
My first trip into enemy territory sort of left me like a man standing outside naked. You felt exposed.
It was an eye-opener, I'll tell you. You had to realize that they wanted to kill you.
I was only 20. Hell, I thought I was having a ball. No fear at all. I don't think anybody did. You would never be able to shoot straight if you were scared.
Well, I always think the stories from World War II come to how young they were and how they had to race to get experience. And they walked in with no flying experience, certainly no tactical experience, and how quickly they had to figure out how to stay alive and then get good at their missions.
We had 15 squadrons operating out of Normandy. I flew 135 combat missions as a low-level fighter reconnaissance pilot.
On the squadron, we had 12 Spitfire, and we were all on the south coast of England.
We cruised at an altitude where we could see what was going on easily. And you're looking for anything that was enemy. We weren't fussy what we shot at.
Well, what the Germans used to do was they have a bunch of tanks, so they would set up at a crossroad, and they would just shoot anything that's coming up the road. So what the Army said was, we need a Typhoon pilot down here.
We'd take off in pairs, and we'd go right in and we would dive bomb and blow it up.
And he climbed back up to 5,000. By now you can see, turn, You start down again.
And you come in very flat. So you hit the target and you pulled up to get away from the target. That's how you strafed.
The trains, they were a favorite target, of course.
The Germans used to load the train with flight guns. That's the most dangerous thing now.
You know, they would be shooting you back. They were determined to get you, too.
And you would say to yourself, nothing's going to happen to me. It never will. That's the only way you can survive.
We usually always intercepted by that 109s, and they would give us a good time.
They were well trained, had a good airplane, aggressive.
We were losing at most every trip. I never thought that I'd get shot down, but I sure came close a lot of times.
You got to prioritize what's important now, what do we got to do, and then be aggressive.
You're passing one another head on, whirling around the sky. In a dogfight, they're everywhere.
If you get into a dogfight, one of you is going to die.
There were times when the shells were going up beside the wing and the cockpit and all over the place, and you got to look after the other guys.
Those boys were so brave. It's hard to imagine how you'd react in that environment. 1 out of every 5 aces in World War II from all the countries was a Canadian.
No, I was just so glad to get across that channel back into England. I'll tell you one thing, all the British women thought that we were the fighter pilots that saved their lives in the Battle of Britain. We didn't tell them any different. We just let them believe we were them too. Talk about fun.
When I was overseas, I was with the public relations section. I would pick up the casualty lists. The number would be 2 or 3 pages, and there would be maybe 100 names on each page.
The mortality rates in Bomber Command were about 50%. It was extreme.
I always had the feeling it's going to be somebody else that's going to get shot down. It's never going to be our crew. I never had the feeling of fear.
I was convinced myself that I was a fatalist, that I was going to go regardless whether it's here or slip on a banana peel on the ground. So that's how I overcame the fear.
And I guess believing that made it possible to do the things that we did, because flying operations was really pretty terrifying.
In my case, I wanted to serve. I didn't want to kill. I had no quarrel with the ordinary Germans. The worst part was about noon. And, oh my God, we're on again tonight. And our stomachs would turn up. But as the time came, we became more composed. We knew we had a job to do.
The briefing would take place, and the plan was you were supposed to hit your target within 1 minute of the time allotted to you.
The #1 bomber group in all of Bomber Command was RCAF 6 Group, and they had the most aircraft ready to go every night, which means that the mechanics were repairing battle-damaged Halifaxes and putting them back into action.
They could take a lot of punishment, come back with part of the wing shot off, or if they're hit with a cannon shot right through the fuselage. So they could take quite a beating.
The bigger the airplane, the more people you needed, the more munitions you needed, more guns that were required for that aircraft. The armors were responsible for maintaining the weapons, not only the ammunition, but to maintain the guns as well.
We had ammunition from the turret way up to almost the center of the aircraft in trays.
As the bomber war evolved, they would launch from over 100 airfields all over England.
The gang begins to form up as prearranged. They begin to form a line behind, one after another. It might represent 10 or 15 different squadrons. If all combined, several hundred people.
They had a full bomb load, they had a full gas load, and the problem was getting off the ground. Very often, some aircraft ahead of you would crash and on takeoff.
A lot of people don't realize that flying in England at night with no navigation lights, the lights were all hooded. But that's why hundreds of planes collided. No lights on planes.
The coast was always difficult. The coast was always a wall of fire.
From the minute you got over enemy territory, you were involved with flak guns.
Your biggest dread was getting coned with a searchlight. You couldn't see a thing. You're blinded. Your only escape was to push the nose of the aircraft down and do a straight dive, and then pull out really quick to escape the beam.
The Germans were sending up fighter pilots, were flying around.
Then, of course, the night fighters would be ready to pounce on you.
I remember my gun would just be white hot from constant firing.
A piece of flak came up from the guns below. It made a hole almost the size of a football.
I went down to the rear, and suddenly 5 streams of fire went right over my head from the rear, and we started to burn.
So as soon as we caught fire, the pilot said he was having trouble controlling, so bail out.
There was only one thing on your mind: how do you get out of here?
I went down to the front to get the escape hatch open. It was just jam solder. Scotty had the axe and he wielded it like it was this demon. He got that escape hatch open.
And I was wounded when the aircraft was hit, so I ended up bailing out at the last minute.
I knew we were low. You're supposed to count 10 before you pull the ripcord. You give it a chance to open. I didn't count 1. I pulled that ripcord the second I got out of the aircraft.
You drop out, you have no feeling of falling. I always jokingly say that I said 7.5 Hail Marys before the chute opened.
I was in a tree, a big white parachute, draped all over, big advertisement. We were 27 crews that went up to reinforce our squadron. We were the last crew to get shot down, so that's a complete wipeout.
When we got back to the station, we found out later that of the 300 aircraft on that raid, 33 had been shot down, all by night fighters. Needless to say, the morale for the next few days on that station was pretty low. 56 airmen lost in one raid. They looked at the crew, none of them were injured except me. He said, "You better get out there and let the medical officer look at that arm." He said, "You got a phosphorus burn." Finally, somebody got the idea, well, send them to East Grinstead, to burn unit there. There were fellows there, you know, they had no ears left, they had no eyelids. Their lips were burned, their noses were gone. Their fingers were like claws. And some of them had so many operations, there was no more skin left to graft.
Out of 100 bomber crews, 50% of them were killed in action outright. 12% were killed or injured in training to get ready to go fly bombers. 13% were prisoners of war. I am just astounded at these young men, what they did.
And the morning of D-Day, I woke up and I heard this horrendous drone. We went outside and the sky was full with aircraft. And I said to Gladys, it's D-Day.
I remember when we crossed the channel, I couldn't help but think about all the fellows that were down in those assault boats and waiting ashore, and how lucky we were to be up in the air.
We were up before dawn, and our operation was to escort the bombers. It was quite a sight. We would go fly along with them, go to the French coast and turn around, come back and go over again.
We flew 3 times that day. The ground fire, anti-aircraft fire, was quite intense, and we lost airplanes as a result of it.
The Germans were holding up the advance of the Canadian forces especially. It was a stone village, but it was a great defensive position, so they laid on a bombing attack.
In 24 hours, we flew 3 bombing raids, one after the other.
They were firing at us seriously all the time. They had our attention. Our morale was right off the clock. We were in really great shape.
For 3 months before June the 6th, all they did was pulverize the railroads, the bridges, the supply roads.
We bombed our way down closer and closer to the coast to soften up the fortifications for the D-Day landing.
There would have been no D-Day success without Bomber Command.
In many regards, Canadians are fairly well aware of the role that the RCF played in Europe. Less known is the fact that the RCF was actually engaged with the Japanese.
We were driving the Japanese out of Burma.
They wanted to get in and see if they could get a hold of India at the time. We had to try and force these Japanese back down to Rangoon and get them out of the area as soon as we could.
We started flying support into the north of Burma first. At one time, they reckoned there were 400 flights a day into Burma, carrying supplies, troops, and materials.
What they would do is they would just open up the side of the aircraft and kick boxes out. Absolutely nothing works without supplies getting somewhere. Nothing happens without us moving the equipment.
We were supplying that with whatever it took to fight a war, like food and ammunition, even animals, mules. We took mules on our aircraft.
You have air crews trying to deliver supplies in an ongoing battle area and in an area that had no roads. It was all air-supplied equipment.
Finally, we got Spitfire and Hurricane aircraft. They were protecting us.
Our targets were the Kisties or the sampans and whatever you could see going up the river that looked dangerous. They had steel cables across the river and on certain bends. They were almost invisible. They were trying to get you to fly into them.
When the monsoon season came on, it got a bit on the hairy side because there were some terrific thunderstorms. It got quite hot. It was 135 in the aircraft. And we'd be soaking wet from perspiration.
In that area of the world, you deal with high heat, you deal with a lot of humidity, you deal with mountainous areas by the coasts. The sky is like an ocean.
Thunderheads had winds inside them of 200 miles an hour. So you had to go around them. You couldn't go through them.
One time coming out, one of the guys flew into it. And we saw a wing pop out of the top and fall back into it. That's all we saw was the wing.
Drawing a parallel to World War II, you have a group of people operating the most complex machines invented and driving towards an objective, and we need all of us to be on our game. I don't think that has changed since World War II, and I don't think that will change in the future either.
VE Day was May the 8th. No doubt about it, everybody started celebrating.
No, I was very happy to go home.
I'll tell you, when we were coming into New York and we saw all the lights, there wasn't a dry eye.
I don't know how to describe it, but it took a lot of adjustment coming back.
I was so happy to get home to Joan's arms. And when I saw her, she looked so beautiful to me. I rushed and grabbed her. I'm sorry I'm not normally this way. It's all coming back to me. I got my wings with about 55 guys, and I don't think there were 20 at the end of the war left.
I always figured the ones that never came home were the heroes.
I think that what got me through the war was a lot of hard praying and just good luck. How the hell could you get through all of that if you weren't lucky?
I needed to have some help to get through all this. And I had a guardian angel who looked after me. I kind of worked them overtime a few times.
In the immediate post-war period, the RCF started looking at more peacetime requirements.
A very small percentage of the country had been mapped at the beginning of World War II in 1939. During the war, a lot of development took place both in cameras and in aircraft.
One of the best examples is 408 Squadron. It had been in 6th Group during the Second World War. After the war, it was reformed and was assigned the task of photo reconnaissance.
At the end of the war, a lot of our Lancasters were brought back and put in storage, and they were in Calgary until we resurrected them.
Many of the Lancaster pilots were World War II guys. My flight commander was a dam buster. The commander in charge of training, he'd been a navigator at the dams. These heroes that you read about in the books, they were there in front of you, leaders of our nation's Air Force.
The aircraft would go and detach to Yellowknife, maybe Churchill, maybe Resolute Bay when they were doing the high Arctic.
You would go up to an area, for instance, an area of 100 miles square. You'd easily do 500 photographs.
The mapping branch in Ottawa, they were the ones who took the photos and converted them into maps.
It was nation building of an immense consequence. That is the largest work that the RCF ever did outside of the war. Our maps were the best maps of any country in the world, bar none.
The need was there, particularly with the desire to develop the North. After the Second World War, it was realized that the Soviet Union was no longer an ally.
And all of a sudden now, you're getting NATO formed in 1949 to go out and try and provide a deterrent force.
And the Canadian government, much like it did in the Second World War, it decided to go in a tremendous way.
We owe it to ourselves, to each other, to do everything human foresight can suggest to prevent the disasters of a Third World War.
We kind of refer to that as the golden age of the Royal Canadian Air Force.
At the end of the Second World War, aircraft switched from piston engine, like Mustangs and Spitfires, through to jet-driven aircraft.
We got into the jet airplanes with the Vampire first, and that was the end of the Spitfire.
We found the Vampire a real nice little airplane. I flew Vampires all the time at Trenton, checked out all the pilots that were going to go on Vampires with the auxiliary squadrons.
So many of our instructors were World War II, people who were retained by the RCAF to instruct. You could see they'd been in a war. Everything was a little more dramatic when you're flying with World War II instructors.
like flying with your father, if you wish. One trip we're skipping along doing a low level, and I'm hanging on for dear life at 50 feet, and the instructor sitting beside me, an old grizzled flight lieutenant, He's smoking a pipe. He says, you know, son, I used to do this for a living. You did, sir? They gave my generation an insight into leadership by example.
Those boys were like gods to me. They had so much experience, you know, and were such good instructors. They cared about us learning as kids.
We introduced the F-86 Sabre, made in Canada with the Orenda engine, and the United States Air Force was flying them at the time, but we made them better. We made them faster.
The F-86 Sabre came on the scene during the Korean War, and it was certainly an impressive piece of technology at that time, a response to the introduction of the MiG-15.
You just strapped it to your ass and off you went to fight. It was very maneuverable, and the Sabre demonstrated that it was the best day-fighting airplane in the world, by far.
Canada had committed a great deal of air power to NATO because there was this pretty persistent, constant threat from the Soviets.
Our job was to make sure that nobody got through the Iron Curtain.
We had 300 F-86 Sabres in theater in Europe at any given time, 12 squadrons. It's an amazing commitment. You needed a lot of pilots, you needed a lot of ground crew. So getting a team like the Golden Hawks started, they needed to fly them across Canada and demonstrate to people the beauty of air shows and recruit people for the RCAF.
I saw the Golden Hawks fly the F-86 over the air show in Edmonton, and I decided right then and there I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
We were in an era of F-86 Sabres, then along came the CF-100.
It was designed, developed, and built in Canada. The CF-100 was particularly well suited to this role of protecting North America. It had a long range, it was sturdy, it carried a number of cannons. So while the F-86s were protecting Europe, the CF-100, a Canadian aircraft, was protecting North America.
But it's not supersonic. So if you want to get to the north as quickly as possible, the more time you can buy yourself by intercepting bombers as far north as possible, the need to go supersonic was definitely there.
The big thing for Canada at the evolution of the jet age was the Avro Arrow.
The Arrow was designed to operate from Canadian bases and intercept Soviet bombers over the Arctic, or as far north as we possibly could.
The RCAF is very much involved in supervising and participating in the development of this aircraft because they have a vested interest in it.
I went down to meet the crew on the Arrow. The Arrow to me was this tremendous blend of 20,000 people from all over the world coming to Canada to make the best airplane that we could, that was a whole new generation of all weather.
It was a horrible coincidence that when the Arrow was rolled out in 1957, it was just when the Russians put Sputnik into orbit, proving the performance of their rockets, which in this case carried a satellite, but in the future would carry a nuclear payload. So the Arrow was canceled.
I was told that the program actually cost the equivalent of the St. Lawrence Seaway. So that puts it in real perspective now in terms of what the Arrow meant.
But there was still a desperate need to understand the layout, the terrain of the Canadian Arctic. 408 not only did a remarkable job of mapping the North, but they also did a surveillance role where they would catch Soviet aircraft on the ice floes.
The Lancasters at Rockcliffe were charged with going up there on secret missions in the early 50s to have a look and see what was going on. You wanted to see if there were any actual physical incursions into our land by Soviet forces.
I was an Argus navigator, and we routinely flew 18-hour patrols. The Argus was the best anti-submarine warfare airplane in NATO. We wanted to know, where did the Soviets think was a good place to conduct a sea-launched missile attack, and how would it be coordinated with those that are coming over the pole?
All my service was overseas. I flew the Starfighter out of Decimomanto, Sardinia.
When Canada acquired the CF-104s in the 1960s, it became a strike reconnaissance role. So the idea was, rather than high-altitude interceptions, they would fly low.
I flew with 441 Squadron on the CF-104 Starfighter in Germany.
It was fast. It was 2.35 times the speed of sound. We committed to the best possible aircraft for the nuclear age in the delivery of an atomic weapon.
It took a lot of training, a lot of skill, and a lot of intuition by pilots to be flying this aircraft so low to the ground.
You're 40 feet above the trees doing 1,000 kilometers an hour. High explosive, we released from 200 feet above the target.
The closer you got to the ground, the less likely you were to be picked up on radar. It was a question of trying to achieve stealth.
The Soviets had to know that if they came for real, they'd pay too big a price to make it worth their while. You had to fly every day like you're going to go to war the next, because that job was so difficult. Unless you practice it every day, you wouldn't be capable of accomplishing it.
It got the nickname Widowmaker because, unfortunately, a number of pilots died due to this fact of flying so close to the ground in this role.
I lost a lot of friends. 38 boys in my logbook that I flew with every day. A lot more than that were killed, but that was just my personal experience. Every 6 months you go to a funeral, that's a lot of kids without dads, you know. So that stays with you.
We're in 410 Squadron, the Cougar Den. In the Cougar Den, there's roughly 10 to 12 aircraft at a time, but we do maintenance on the airframe and the flight controls, landing gear, and engines. We're a vital role because we're the ones that get our aircraft airworthy so that they can fly.
I grew up with posters of fighter planes on my wall, and being a fighter pilot was somehow just very important to me. Many of the choices I would make in life were directed at trying to attain that goal of becoming a fighter pilot and flying an F-18. It's an extraordinary airplane.
When the CF-18 arrived, it was intended to replace 3 different airplanes 2 generations removed from it. And it was a massive leap forward for the Air Force with an incredibly sophisticated, super expensive airplane.
We knew we were going to end up gunfighting. That F-18 was about the best gunfighter in the sky.
The Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990 caught Western analysts completely off guard. For the RCAF, we were able to send a combination of 2 squadrons, and it amounted to 24 to 26 aircraft at any given time. They became known as the Desert Cats.
The F-18 was a remarkable aircraft, mostly because of its ease of managing and actually flying the airplane, but also its ability to manage the weapon systems and do all of its assigned roles.
What was truly unique about the Gulf War was that it was the first time since the Korean War Canadian pilots and ground crew are going into harm's way. They were actually in active combat.
In the Gulf War, we were able to fly it in multi-roles, so air-to-air, air-to-ground, sweep escort, close air support. Our ground crew were just outstanding. Their challenges would have been the sand blowing everywhere.
So just like in the Second War, it is the ground crew who provide maintenance to that airplane and keep that airplane going. Those guys are my heroes. They were of all different trades, and as you can imagine, technical experience.
For the jets, I find it's almost like working with horses. Some horses, they like their little temperature range. We had some jets that didn't like the cold. Some jets, they like the heat. They all have their own little things that they like, and as working as a ground crew, you get to know these things.
At least 10 to 12 people will see an aircraft prior to pilots even arriving. 2 or 3 people checking the aircraft, 3 to 4 people loading aircraft multiple times a day.
Working minimum of 12 hours a day. My shift was noon to midnight. We were extremely busy, and we loved it.
They were our babies, every single one of them.
My uncle was in the first Gulf War. He was a fighter pilot flying F-18s, and he had some really amazing stories. And just with his stories were the ones I was connected with. I think the statistics are, like, I was the 5th female fighter pilot in Canada. And I was like, yeah, but I'm just the one that's on my way to 105th.
I was familiar with all of the trappings and the attention of being one of the first female pilots in the Canadian military. I can fly fighters. Gender doesn't enter into it. We used to be taught that we couldn't.
I liked the idea of just normalizing the fact that fighter pilots don't look like Tom Cruise in Top Gun.
Here I am in my F-18 and I'm thinking, I can't believe I'm doing this. Look at me, I'm doing this. Sometimes when a dream has been a dream for so long, when it becomes reality, it still feels like a dream.
There's kind of the dream of being a pilot and then the work that is contained in it, and it becomes every part of you. You will live, eat, breathe, sleep being a fighter pilot.
Shortly after I got qualified to fly the F-18, we went over to operate combat missions over Kosovo for Operation Allied Force. My father's time is a Cold War time. And this notion that we would go to other places in the world on a relatively short notice to actually do combat missions was not something you saw.
What is unique about the Kosovo experience is the Canadian military, the RCAF, Peacetime Air Force, assumed an outsized role as leaders of the conflict. We were the leaders of 50% of the missions that we flew. That really says so much about the skill set of the Canadian fighter force.
Training is everything. If you train the way you will fight a war, you will be successful. Once you're in a combat situation, all the little stuff goes away. You just focus on that one job.
All of the squadrons here in Cold Lake all have a rich history dating back to World War II. So we're training the next generation of F-18 pilots. What I find really rewarding about the job is taking my experience and passing it down and carrying on that culture of professionalism.
I was trained by experienced fighter pilots and instructors that had combat experience either in the Gulf War, in Kosovo. They often imparted what their experiences were like and just how disciplined you have to be.
It's very special to be part of an organization that has those stories, but it's even more important to try to absorb as much wisdom as you can from all those experienced individuals.
That experience is really difficult to attain. It's important to pass that on to the younger pilots coming through the system so that they don't have to learn those same mistakes that you made.
To be a fighter pilot is to very much understand that there's an enormous public trust. You are being asked to do something on behalf of the other 35 million or 40 million people that is very difficult and has extremely high stakes. It's a deadly serious job that can be tremendous fun when you get yourself competent enough and qualified enough that you can execute to the best of your abilities.
The Air Force plays an essential role in the sovereignty of Canada, and the reason is because we have such a vast country. The Air Force and fighter operations give you reach to say to our adversaries, we patrol these borders.
We don't take Canada's sovereignty for granted. I can still remember going through the fighter pilot training and doing the lead-ups to what a NORAD mission, would look like. And in the training, them saying, the next time you're doing this could be over the Arctic with the Russians.
We, NORAD, as a team, have eyes and ears, and it's 24/7. All across North America, from the northern tip of Nunavut all the way down to Florida and Texas. We have a direct working relationship with the American field units that have capabilities of their own in the concert of NORAD whenever it is required.
The role of the CP-140, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, everything from coastal patrol, surveying the Atlantic on the east coast, the Pacific on the west coast. Its main primary role, though, is anti-submarine warfare.
We are a maritime patrol aircraft. We patrol the oceans for Canada. The whole idea of a presence mission, a surveillance mission over the ocean, is to deter them from trying to do something that would be contrary to Canada's best interests.
I think it's very important because we go up north looking at protecting our coastline, our country. I like being with a crew. I like the interaction, and I love the role what the airplane does, because where can you take an airplane down to 100 feet over the water? It's just a big adventure.
My role is a tactical coordinator. There are 5 sensor operators that work with me. and they process all of the sensor data from either the acoustic sonobuoys or the radar and help fight the mission.
So this is the CH-148 Cyclone. It is an incredibly capable machine.
We sort of fill the gap in that the Aurora can't do. Our environment is low level, over the water. You can fly in night, all weather, icing conditions.
When we operate off the back of a ship, we're kind of an extension of the ship's capabilities.
It is a fully mission-capable, state-of-the-art aircraft, and it is employed in roles such primarily anti-submarine warfare.
We support our allies if there's something known to be out under the water, that we can go, help them locate it, track it, try to figure out where it's going next, and monitor what's happening.
I love what I'm doing. That's my passion right now. As long as I'm flying, I'm happy.
I didn't choose maritime helicopter chose me. I get to fly around this helicopter, and I get to serve my country. It's a fantastic career.
I would argue that what makes the helicopter a good tool to our military is probably in many ways exactly what makes a good helicopter pilot. It's flexibility, the ability to adapt to your environment, adapt to your mission. Because we are employed in such a wide variety of roles.
Tactical aviation in general is a combat support element. Infantry, armored, other elements of the Canadian Army are our primary customer.
For tactical helicopters, we've got two types in the RCAF. One is the Griffin that we fly here at 403, and one is the Chinook that they fly out of Petawawa.
When they're deployed to help out the ground force is often in trouble. They need the effects that aviation can bring on the battlefield, so it's an amazing force multiplier to have them come and help us out.
I deployed to Afghanistan on Apathina in 2011 with 408 Squadron.
It was a bit of a wake-up call to most Canadian pilots who landed in Kandahar in a pretty intense combat operations, and we were there to help our brothers and sisters in arms on the ground and keep our Canadians safe.
Kandahar has its own atmosphere. It's middle of a desert, middle of a valley, very hot, very windy, dust storms almost daily.
A lot of our maintenance was performed at night due to the temperatures during the day. We always make things work and get the rubber on the ramp to be mission ready.
The people that come help the fastest are helicopters. The visibility at the height that they are provides them an immense amount of situational awareness to conduct close combat attacks.
That was probably the single most stressing thing that we could experience. Arriving to a conflict area, knowing that there is enemy there ready to shoot at you. We were unquestionably shot at and shot back. It was just really a part of the mission and reality of what was going on there. I know that there are Canadians that have come home alive as a direct result of what we did.
When the shit hits the fan, you can always count on the Air Force to come help you out.
In a lot of ways, military service is all about training. What we have to do is identify the key core skills that our pilots, aviators supporting ground forces need out in the world. So all we can do to prepare for that is train.
This is very realistic to what someone would do on any deployment that would require air-land integration. Typically what would happen is the ground force creates a plan and we integrate it with the air plan so that the Air Force supports the ground tactical maneuver and sets the conditions for our success.
We train as you fight, always. And because we're always working with the infantry, we know how they operate, and we've developed that relationship because we've exercised it multiple times.
It's really important that we do exercises with them as much as possible. These were reservists. It was their first time actually dropping from a helicopter on a rappel. This could be used to insert troops to a certain area where we couldn't land the aircraft.
The Chinook does tactical transport of personnel, people, and supplies, so really a well-rounded role. You're very prepared when you go to your unit and then train on the actual aircraft you're going to be flying. We're known worldwide for our training, and it really shows in our pilots.
The good thing about the tactical aspect of the RCAF is that it could be a Chinook or it could be a Griffin. The capability that we have as a unit is pretty much endless. When you join the forces is because you want to make a difference.
We are very selfless. We will give until we cannot give anymore.
It's our culture to always push harder, deploy quicker. We put ourselves in a position where we can support others.
Mali was descending into instability, and there was a UN mission called MINUSMA. The Canadian mission was there to support medical evacuation for the big UN operation. There were thousands of troops out there at multiple locations.
We did not have a real combat medical evacuation capability per se, so we built it.
A lot of logistical support went into getting us over there as well. So not just the aircraft, but we got to get aircraft parts. We've got to get all the tools to fix aircraft, to put blades back on an aircraft.
We had our self-contained med bags, oxygen equipment, all of our electronic monitors, like for vital signs and being able to ventilate people.
Mali is a very large country with a very low population density, mostly desert environment, very harsh environment, extremely warm.
I think the highest temperature that we had while I was there was 55 degrees in the shade.
The heat in the desert is incredible, but you're also hyped up on adrenaline.
There was a lot of instability, human trafficking, weapons and drugs. All of that collided in that space.
We were the only military unit that could, if we had to, fight our way in and fight our way out with our injured personnel. So that became a very valuable asset for very specific missions.
The standard package in Mali was 1 Chinook and 2 Griffins. So the Griffins would go ahead and prove that the landing site was safe, and we would bring in that medical team and the force protection team.
That whole team in the back of the Chinook was there to fly in to the casualty collection point where they had grouped any injured soldiers.
When we landed, we were off the aircraft very quickly, and they took off and left us there to fly back to a safe position.
We took off, went up to a safe height, and the Griffins provided that overhead protection for them while they were on the ground.
Basically, the bodyguards, we could detect all these potential threats against our team.
Apparently it was only, I think, about 15-ish minutes, but it felt like forever.
As we saw them coming in, we were moving with the first stretchers, and they hit the ground, the ramp was down, we were on almost immediately.
Combat first aid is really organized chaos.
There is a lot going on, and it can be overwhelming.
Flying medevac is a unique experience.
We're cranking and banking the helicopter. It is hot, it's 50 degrees. The medical staff are down on their knees on the floor, performing miracles on these casualties.
So you're trying to figure out which way the aircraft is going to go while you're trying to do a procedure where we need maybe a little more flat and level. Doesn't always work, so it's a lot of communication.
There's people bleeding. Many of them were shot, multiple gunshot wounds. Some of them had broken bones as well.
They did such a fantastic job over there. I'll always admire the work that they did.
We helped save people's lives. Canadians helped save people's lives that day.
The weather in the North Atlantic is a very unforgiving environment, and exposing someone intentionally to that, to go and save the life of someone else potentially, is a really humbling experience.
We got the call around 3 in the morning.
32 people on board a vessel on fire, approximately 200 kilometers offshore. So we stripped the aircraft down to bare bones, put as many seats on as we could, and then we headed on our way out.
Having 2 of our guys on a boat managing the ingress of water in 30-foot seas with 32 people on board would definitely be, in my mind, a worst case. You're managing lots of people with lots of different things going on.
We don't train in 10-meter waves and 100-kilometer winds, so it's something that's kind of unprecedented for us.
You get very good at making a plan A to C, because once you get on scene, maybe the actual situation has evolved into something else that your first course of action isn't going to properly take care of.
Our plan was to deliver them the hook and then bring crew members and the 2 SARTECs off the boat. So it's really the choreographing between the moving target with the moving helicopter in a moving ocean.
There's so much room for error, you could easily hurt someone or even worse.
The sea state was very high, so penetrating a big vessel like that with a hoist cable can be very, very tricky. It started proving very challenging for the SARTECs to get these guys off.
When you show up, you're that glimmer of hope for them. You still have a job to do. You got to get them out of that environment.
Your training does kick in. It becomes instinctive. You're not thinking about what you're really doing at that point. You're just doing it.
Both search and rescue and the ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance missions we conduct here are supported by both the mission support squadron and the operational support squadron. The pointy end does not exist without the rest of the arrow.
The motto of search and rescue is that others may live. So, it's about us doing what we can to help other people.
This is why we train so hard, and when that all aligns and you get to do your job and do it well and have a positive result like that, it can be very gratifying.
This happens on a daily basis. This is what our people do. It's really incredible. The following day, the Atlantic Destiny sank.
On the wall back there, it's a bunch of life jackets. Those are all from people who've been rescued from a sinking boat and brought on the helicopter and then delivered back to their families. And the crews write their name and their date on it.
You've been able to touch someone's life in such a personal way that they're going to remember for the rest of their life. And I know that I do.
I have a wife and 4 children, so there is a certain amount of stress involved when I do get called out in the middle of the night, and everybody's usually very happy to see me walk in the door sometime before school in the morning.
For modern day search and rescue, our biggest challenges are weather and terrain.
The mountains, they're a beautiful place to fly, but they're a very intimidating place to fly as well, because you're flying at a couple thousand feet and the mountains are 6,000 to 8,000 feet above you.
BC gets a lot of rain in the shoulder seasons, but this was an exceptional amount of rain, so much so that it exceeded the capacity for the mountain. The 2 landslides essentially cut off a section of road with around 300 people trapped on it.
So the Joint Rescue Coordination Center will do a lot of the background investigation into what's going on, what assets are needed, and then they'll task the asset and they'll give us a call to go do whatever mission we're asked to do.
So we briefed and we said, hey, this is what we can expect. So we were thinking about how we're going to get the gear out there, logistically, how we're going to do this, how many helicopters do we need?
A lot of times you are going to a situation, so when you sit down as a crew before going somewhere, you talk about it. There's a lot of experience within these SAR crews.
The Cormorant, it's a large helicopter, which gives it good range, so you can go far distances offshore. It's got 3 engines, which provide more power and more reliability and safety for the missions we do.
It was just cloud that was sitting all the way down to the ground, and it enveloped the helicopter. We're flying visually, we're looking outside, and we're able to stay oriented to the terrain around us and make sure we don't fly into a mountain. At first, we were maybe a little bit overconfident because it was a highway. We're like, oh yeah, we'll fit, no problem, right? And then we got there and it was like, oh, it's tight. Once we hit the ground, we got the heavy urban SAR team out so they could start organizing the evacuation for the evacuees on the road.
Working at a search and rescue unit, it's very gratifying. You feel good coming to work. You feel proud to be part of the unit.
Well, if you told me when I was a kid that I'd get paid well, a free grilled cheese sandwich every day, and get to fly helicopters and save people, I'd say, there's no way that job exists. So yes, I am very grateful for the opportunity.
Climate change is causing us to be used in a manner that I haven't seen in most of my career. It's for support to fires, floods, natural disasters within Canada. Air Force was a part of every portion of that, and I'm really proud of that.
We were tracking that there were fires in Yellowknife, and the RCAF might be required to evacuate a hospital.
In the Northwest Territories, there had been fires burning for some time, and there had been multiple evacuations in Yellowknife.
In this case, knowing how many patients we may be required to move, like up to 70, we said a C-17 is what's going to be needed.
The C-17 is a heavy airlift capability. We transport cargo and personnel all around the world. You name it, we'll do it.
Thursday night, we had all of the people into place. Friday morning, I flew in and met the team, and then we were off to get up to Yellowknife.
Strategic airlift is really important in the Canadian Forces because it enables us to quickly adapt to the situation that the mission requires.
We had to pull together a means of moving 40 patients against the backdrop of approaching fires, a crisis situation. They loaded the entire hospital into the back of the C-17 with fantastic assistance from the hospital staff in Yellowknife. And then they all landed in Vancouver, and there was a fantastic reception committee who were able to take the patients off the aircraft very quickly.
It's extremely rewarding to be there for Canadians when they need the military.
It's not just a job, but it's a way of life, and it's quite rewarding to know that we're making a difference.
Transport and logistics is the backbone that keeps the Air Force going. We fly all over Canada to remote places. The C-130 Hercules can get into shorter runways further away and fly higher and faster. For Operation Impact, we're stationed out of an American Air Force base in Kuwait. We would fly troops and supplies from there into various locations in Iraq in support of the anti-ISIS fight.
The pilots are in charge of planning and taking care of the front end of the aircraft, and everything that happens on the back end of the aircraft is handled by the loadmaster.
Operation Reassurance is primarily support to Ukraine. We have a couple aircraft that are stationed out of Prestwick.
It is our deployed transport hub. We will deploy a crew in an aircraft to fly to a country, pick up the equipment that they'd like to donate to Ukraine. To give you an idea of how busy we were, I was there for 62 days and I visited 30 countries.
The CC-130 Herc in a SAR environment holds a bunch of roles. It can be transport. When it's integrated with helicopters, it's used a lot for communications, and it can stay in the air for a while.
We can go high, we can go low, we can go in the mountains, we can go over water for extended periods of time. We always talk about search and rescue, but we always concentrate on the rescue, which is phenomenal because that's why we're there. But the search is the bigger aspect, if you will. It's usually a lot longer, it's a lot harder. It's finding a needle in a haystack most of the times.
You don't quite know what you're going to need to effect a rescue. We have all of this equipment on board. There's typically 2 SAR techs, fully medical qualified. The majority of my job really is spent training. SAR techs have to practice the rigging of the equipment, they have to practice their medicine, and the parachuting.
This job is highly rewarding. It's a lot of hard work, but it's a lot of fun.
In terms of saving someone's life, there's really nothing like it. I feel fortunate that A, the job exists, and B, that I'm the guy who's wearing the uniform.
There are a lot of challenges in becoming an RCAF pilot, and we know that we put our students through that because we expect a lot of them.
Flying is a very interesting mixture of something that's very academic and something that's very physical. There's a huge amount of background knowledge that you need to be able to function in the job, but then you also still have to use your brain to make your body put the aircraft to where it needs to be using your hands and feet.
Phase 1 is a fire hose. The Air Force is taking people who've never flown. Most of us have never flown an aircraft before in our life. And in the span of about 21 missions, you're controlling a decently high-powered aircraft, and you're flying it alone.
We're asking a lot of you, and yet it's not about you at all. It's about the effect that you're going to bring to somebody who needs you. That's an awesome opportunity. That's a lot of responsibility. It's an amazing feeling that you're a part of that big of a team.
The experience that I have from previous tours provides me with a bit of an edge in that I can bring an element of realism to the training that is going to enhance their capability of doing the job when the day comes they need to use it.
We have a varied group of students. The intent is just to create a team of technicians that are going to be fixing the aircraft with the different systems that we have on it. That's very important to pass that knowledge down.
I've learned a lot of really valuable lessons from Afghanistan and Romania and other deployments I've done. I'm passing that knowledge on to the techs on the floor here now.
This is my second career, and I wanted to work with my hands and just be more like into my job. My dad is an avian tech, so I had a good idea of what the job entailed.
We've got computer-based training which are the lectures that you kind of learn on your own. We've got lectures in class, and we do get simulator time.
The addition of simulation allows us to do things in a simulator that we wouldn't be able to do safely in the real world. You can repeat something 100 times without causing damage to a training aid.
And we can add an immense amount of realism and pressure in the training in the simulator without risking any lives.
We never learn alone. It's always a group. Being a part of a team and getting through moments of adversity is just as critical while we're learning to train as it is out in the working world.
We all want to see each other succeed.
It's not a knife fight trying to be top of the course over someone else. It's just a bunch of people trying to get as good as they can.
The fact that it's challenging and it's such a long journey makes it that much more satisfying in the end. Getting those wings and getting to be operational and doing missions in the future, that's what drives all of us.
Our non-commissioned members are really the supporters and the enablers of operations. There's about 70 trades in and out of the RCAF that enable operations day to day.
I'm part of the junior advisory panel. Our voices matter because we all have the same goal, to make sure that the Canadian Forces is an inclusive place to work.
We want to be that cultural mosaic that is Canada. People who come from different backgrounds, gender identities, different races, and having a fresh mindset, it's critical to the way that we operate.
Through the Indigenous Defense Advisory Group, I was able to incorporate my culture into my workplace, and that itself has given me a great opportunity to take a leadership role into helping the D&D community understand how important this was for other Indigenous members on the wing.
For a lot of the Indigenous cultures, it's not about the self, it's about working with others for the greater good of your community.
I left Philippines when I was 18 years old. Right after I had my citizenship, I joined the forces because I have a fervent passion for aviation and a strong desire to reciprocate the opportunities Canada has provided me and my family.
The RCAF has given me a purpose. It provided me with the skills to become a more mature adult, a well-rounded person, a father, a leader. In 2021, I was diagnosed with osteosarcoma. It's a form of bone cancer. But after I was able to recover from my amputation, they invited me back, just giving me that purpose and that desire to want to make myself better and get out of bed to lead these guys and be a positive example for them.
If you can inspire somebody else to be great and go beyond their own limitations, it makes your limitations almost boundless.
Growing up as a kid in Edmonton, my parents supported me with my passion at a young age of aircraft, and it started with the air shows. My room was placard full of all the snowbird posters, and that's what I wanted to do.
Snowbirds split now.
I was at the Snowbirds' very first performance in Moose Jaw in 1971. I really wanted to be on an aerobatic team like that.
What I wanted was to put a show in front of people that would wow them. I wanted the team to fly very close formation, about 4 feet apart, and you know, we got a fantastic response.
We go from town to town, city to city, and show the professionalism and to thrill them.
We're a pretty high-profile team. This is demanding for them. They will be on the road for 6 months of the year.
It's been an incredible amount of work to get to this point, more than I could have imagined. The show starts in our minds the minute we walk into the briefing room.
We're about to go and take 9 aircraft flying at 350 miles an hour within 4 to 8 feet of each other, and you want to make sure that that entire cadre is ready to go. And so the briefing is extremely critical in preparing ourselves for the show.
No show is ever the same. Winds are different. That's a big one. Density, altitude is a huge player. Those are all variables that change with each show, and that's why the briefings before the show are so important.
This is the MSV support vehicle.
As many of the parts and equipment that we would need to make sure we can service and maintain anything that could break during the snowbird season.
We walk out in a certain way. We get into the jets a certain way. We start the aircraft altogether in a certain, very specific way. And from that moment on, it's game time.
The evolution of photography, but especially video, has come so far in the last few decades.
We dusted off an old empty diesel smoke tank and we put some smaller action cameras in there. Not a lot of people get the opportunity to ever fly in a Tudor, but if you could share that experience with them, you bring them that much closer to your world.
Actually, the gravy is the flying, the meat and potatoes is the public relations. Getting out there and motivating people and talking to people.
Meeting the little people every day, especially the little girls, is like so unbelievably awesome. And their moms, and they're like, oh my God, this is a female pilot, look, you can do it too.
It's not lost on me, the history part of it, and those that have gone before, to just kind of share the message of the Air Force, serving Canada, and the essence of what the Air Force is.
When I look back at my career path now, I realize that the decision to join Air Cadets was a game changer for me. I was a pretty shy young farm boy. I didn't really like to be in a leadership position. I lacked self-confidence, and the Air Cadet program was intent on building those skill sets for me.
This opportunity is kind of like a legendary experience among cadets.
There's only 100 of them selected in all of Canada to attend the glider pilot training course.
For me, this course has been an incredible opportunity to learn a ton of new things, make a bunch of new friends, and just have the experience of a lifetime.
It's also about the community within. They work together to accomplish the goals.
I'm hoping to become an aircraft maintenance engineer, and I am gaining hours towards my level while also helping the cadets get their glider wings. And I help fix the gliders and the tow planes.
We provide the opportunities. We set the expectations. We are the guiding stars.
I had a great experience in Air Cadets. It helped shape the beginning of my leadership career as well.
Being a flight instructor here tested my leadership abilities quite a bit. It's just this great developmental opportunity to learn more about aviation, to stress my knowledge and flying ability in a different way.
So the tow plane goes in front, glider behind. All the cadets that are still on the ground are going to be pushing the other gliders into position.
It's still ingrained in my memory, following that tow plane up, a little bit nervous, trying to stay behind this plane that's pulling you up into the sky.
My first solo flight, I still remember just hearing the wind go over the wings. Once you're released from the tow plane and you're just out there on your own, it was just peaceful bliss.
And suddenly it gets real quiet, and it's just such a tremendous sense of freedom.
It's that trust and that confidence of, wow, I'm really doing this all on my own.
I can't define the feeling. It's just the best feeling in the world, to be honest, to me.
And a tremendous confidence boost when you land from that and you're like, wow, I just did that. What an extraordinary gift to give a human being from the point of view of confidence.
I just think it's incredible how I have this opportunity, living here in Canada, and then just having this program to go with that. It's just incredible. My dreams are already coming true, and I'm only 16, so.
Canada has been involved in space for a long time. We not only recognize space as a domain, but put it under a service, and for us that was under the Royal Canadian Air Force, to make sure that we have the right focus on the capabilities, the people, the training, and the outcomes that we need within the space domain.
The relationship between military and civil space is certainly complementary, but they're very different missions. NASA, CSA, other space agencies around the world are really concentrating their efforts on the science and the exploration of space. And the military context really, at the moment, we're concentrating mostly inside the geostationary belt, if you will, to sort of understand who's doing what, from a satellite perspective and what's happening a little bit closer to Earth. That said and done, Canada and the RCAF have a very proud tradition of having members get selected for the Canadian Astronaut Corps. Colonel Chris Hadfield, Colonel Jeremy Hansen, and Colonel Josh Kutrick. Certainly a point of pride for the RCAF.
For me, a major milestone in my career was this transition to being an astronaut. Still an active duty member of the Royal Canadian Air Force, but posted abroad to NASA at the Johnson Space Center, which opened up an entire new pathway for me and new opportunities, new challenges. There will be a Canadian flying on the first vehicle that leaves low Earth orbit in over 50 years. The opportunity to see the planet, the entire blue marble hanging in space, it will simply reinforce something that I already know to be true, that humanity is extraordinary. Our existence on this planet is extraordinary.
The fact that in 90 minutes, you go completely around the world, 16 times a day, you see all 8 billion people every day. It's an amazing platform to be on, to be up on board a spaceship.
I've always been a believer that you have the passion, the drive, you can achieve anything, and Jeremy Hansen is living proof. Chris Hadfield is living proof. They found a place that cultivated the best of them.
I'm extraordinarily proud to represent the Royal Canadian Air Force on this mission, taking humanity back to the moon. But I look at it as a tiniest fraction of what the RCAF really is. This has been earned over decades by literally thousands of people. When I think about 100 years of serving Canadians and humankind around the world, that can be our source of inspiration and tackle the challenges that are ahead.
I didn't know it was the 100th birthday of the Royal Canadian Air Force. I didn't know that. I feel honored. I really do. If I could go back to my 18th birthday, I would do it over again. I really would.